Chapter 13. Hopefully the real me told you to open your book to 272 because I want you to follow along certain pages here. We are entering a whole new era with the death of the Federalists, moving westward, defeating Great Britain twice with the War of 1812. Indeed, the title of this chapter is really true, The Rise of a Mass Democracy. And as you note, the time period here, and this is notable because it's going to be the rise of mass democracy before the Civil War. After this election of 1840, then we become sectionalized into North and South. Okay, so now the first thing that goes along with the book here, so follow along. The first thing that we talk about is the corrupt bargain, and that's an election of 1824, and it's after the era of good feelings, which ended in 1820 with the Missouri Compromise, and it really ends with this election because there are no good feelings whatsoever. So politics are transformed after this. And I'm just going to read a lot of this to you, add stuff to it. The big winner of this transformation was the common man. Make sure you write that down. Tell real me to pause if you need to. Okay, I'm not going to say that anymore. Anyway, and specifically the common white man, okay, no woman in there, and certainly no slaves or Indians, as universal white manhood suffrage. Suffrage means the right to vote. Ask me to tell you a story about that word. And so as states were progressing and changing laws, they more and more common, regular folk, even if they possibly didn't own land, were allowed to vote. Didn't have to join a church and all that stuff that was characteristic of the New England times. Okay, this election of 1824, there were 4 towering candidates, and you'll see pictures of all of these guys eventually. And we're also starting our ugliest Americans of the 19th century contest, and all of these guys are front runners. Andrew Jackson, Tennessee, Henry Clay of Kentucky, this guy we're not going to pay much attention to, William Crawford, and John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts, still hanging on with that New England hoity-toityness. They all call themselves Republicans, and if you look, no, never mind, I thought they had a chart. All like national Republicans or some kind of Republican. So the last Democratic Republican has kind of gone away, kind of morphed into this common man, and the Federalists are gone. So they're all a kind of Republican. 3 were a favorite son of their respective region, but Clay thought of himself as a national figure. He was Speaker of the House and author of the American System. Remember that? So the rest of them were more regional, but Henry Clay is pretty much a bigwig in this time. Now turn to page 274. The result of this election, Jackson got the most popular votes and the most electoral votes, but he failed to get the majority in the Electoral College. John Quincy Adams, son of second President John Adams, he came in second in both, while Crawford was in fourth, in the popular in third, and Clay was fourth in electoral vote. Now, according to the 12th Amendment, the top 3 electoral vote getters would be voted upon in the House of Representatives. The majority, over 50%, would then be elected, become president. Stay with me here, kids. Clay was eliminated, but he was the Speaker of the House. Crawford, he was gone. He hated Jackson. He threw his support behind John Quincy Adams. That's not a vote, just saying that he helped him become president. Let's see, I think we're getting to it. Okay, here's, I think, the main gist of it. When Clay was appointed Secretary of State, the traditional stepping stone to the presidency, Jacksonians cried foul play and corruption. Jackson, he said, the people's choice had been swindled. Jackson said he about himself, the people had been swindled out of the presidency by career politicians in Washington, D.C. So what this corrupt bargain came down to was that since Henry Clay was Speaker of the House, what is believed is that there was some kind of bargain that if John Quincy Adams was elected president by the House of Representatives, then Adams would appoint Henry Clay as Speaker of the House. So the belief is that Henry Clay influenced the House of Representatives votes to vote for John Quincy Adams. Does that make sense? So anyway, it really wasn't that corrupt. There were bargains that were made all of the time. This just looked really bad in this age of more opening common man kind of stuff. This looked like a hoity-toity New Englander with this Henry Clay who thought of himself as, as fancy and as uptown as a New Englander. Okay, so that's going to start off our common man era. All right, John Quincy Adams, you can look at him on page 275. Like I told you, definitely a front runner in the ugliest Americans of the 19th century. Very puritanical, meaning very straight-laced and did the right thing. He had a lot of respect rather than popularity. Like his father, he was able but somewhat wooden and lacked the people's touch, which Jackson notably had, you will see. During his administration, he only removed 12 public servants from the federal payroll, thus refusing to kick out efficient office holders in favor of his own, possibly less efficient supporters. That is basically the definition of the spoils system, which we'll get to. In his first annual message, Adams urged Congress on the construction of roads and canals, and proposed a national university, the American University in Washington, D.C., and advocated support for an astronomical observatory, which people thought he was crazy. Mixed reaction on all of these things. Observatories weren't important, and Southerners knew that if the government did anything, it would have to continue collecting tariffs. So we're going to talk about the tariff again. Okay. With land, Adams tried to curb over-speculation of land, much to Westerners' anger, even though he was doing it for their own good. And with the Cherokee Indians, he tried to deal fairly with them, although the state of Georgia successfully resisted federal attempts to help the Cherokee. So he seemed like a good guy. He just, look at the picture. He looks scary. He just wasn't warm and fuzzy. So anyway, turn the page, kind of. 276, going whole hog for Jackson. So this is the election of 1828, and so Jackson is going to be back with a vengeance. He argued, should the people rule? Jacksonians argued, should the people rule, and said that the Adams-Clay bargaining 4 years before had cheated the people out of their rightful victor. They successfully turned public opinion against an honest and honorable president. Well, whatever. However, Adams supporters also hit below the belt, even though Adams himself wouldn't stoop to that level. Mudslinging had reached new lows. Mudslinging is attacking, like what we hear all the time and what we're going to hear more and more of, when they attack a president rather than saying what they're going to do. They were talking smack about Jackson's mama, called her a prostitute, called him an adulterer. He married his wife, Rachel, whom he was just crazy about. They both thought her divorce had been granted, only discover 2 years later that it hadn't been, so that was adultery. After he got elected, Rachel died. Jackson blamed Adams's people, who slandered Jackson for Rachel's death. And you never wanted to be on the list of people Jackson never forgave, because he was just a very vengeful, yet really loving, just very passionate guy. We're going to watch some stuff on him. Okay, John Quincy Adams had purchased with his own money for his own use. Oh, this is some like talking smack about John Adams. He had a billiard table that he bought himself. Jacksonian seized on this, talking about his incessant or extravagant spending, and also accusing him of gambling and all that kind of stuff. So once again, look at the map on 276 and you can see the landslide election of Jackson. Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory because when I forget which battle it was, they said Jackson was as tough as a hickory stick. So that was his nickname. And the guy, oh my gosh, that's like nothing could kill him. He had dysentery, which, look that up, malaria, tuberculosis, lead poisoning from 2 bullets that he got shot with, and still died pretty much an old guy. He personified the New West. And when I say West, we're talking Tennessee. Look up at my map. West still being, pretty much east of the Mississippi River. Jack of all trades, a genuine folk hero, so with a common man, even though he was a slave-owning, wealthy guy by the time he's in politics. Like all politicians, he's going to play up that nice guy thing. Born in the backwoods of the Carolinas. We're not even sure if it's north or south. Both states still claim to be his home. Jackson had been early orphaned, was interested in cockfighting as a kid, and wasn't really good with reading and writing, sometimes misspelling the same word twice in one letter. That sounds like my son, so I guess maybe he'll be president someday. He went to Tennessee, became a judge and a congressman, and his passions were so profound that he could choke up on the floor. He had a violent temper. He got into many duels and fights and stabbings. He was a Western aristocrat. Having owned many slaves, lived in a fine mansion, the Hermitage, which you can go visit today. And he shared many of the prejudices of the masses. Okay, I already told you this about the Old Hickory. He was an anti-federalist, believing the federal government was for the privileged only, although he maintained the sacredness of the Union and the federal power of the states. Still, he welcomed the Western democracy. So he was really, a mixed bag of tricks. He didn't like the federal government's power and being for just the privilege, yet when it comes down to it, you'll see nobody crosses him because he's going to be the representative of the federal government as president. So he's, you can't really tell which side he plays on. And then he goes against the Supreme Court later on. Jackson commanded fear and respect from his subordinates and ignored here it is, Supreme Court on several occasions. Supreme Court's only 9 people. They don't have the power to enforce. That's the president's job, is to enforce. He also used the veto 12 times compared to a combined 10 times by his predecessors. And on his inauguration, he let commoners come into the White House, where they just wreaked havoc. They wrecked China, caused chaos. They were drunk. They spiked the punch bowl in the White House, and they called it the inaugural bowl, and they called the whole thing the inaugural brawl. Conservatives condemned Jackson as king mobbed and berated him greatly.